The soft hum of the city floated through the wide glass windows of my corner office. Below, the streets of Chicago buzzed with their usual chaos: horns, hurried footsteps, laughter spilling from coffee shops. But up here it was quiet.
Calm.
Powerful. I leaned back in my chair, fingers brushing across the silk of my navy blouse, the kind of fabric I once couldn't even dream of affording. On my desk, a Montblanc pen rested on a neatly stacked contract, its ink still fresh from this morning's signing. The air smelled faintly of roasted hazelnut coffee, still warm in the porcelain cup beside me. Then my phone buzzed. A new email. My eyes flicked to the subject line and I froze. Supply proposal request, Harrington Group. Harrington. The very name sent a ripple through me. Years ago, they were the ones who looked me in the eye, dismissed me, and said my ideas were too small to matter. They laughed even. I remember the sting, the humiliation. And now they were asking for my service. I let out a quiet laugh, low and disbelieving. The irony tasted sweeter than the expensive coffee on my tongue. They had once refused me. Today, they couldn't move an inch without me. And they didn't even know yet who was sitting on the other side of the supply chain. I slid my phone aside, leaning back deeper into my chair, a slow smile curving at my lips. Looks like fate has a sense of humor, I whispered to myself. I wasn't always the woman with the corner office and polished nails. A decade ago, I was just a 23-year-old with shaking hands and a cheap thrift store blazer that smelled faintly of someone else's perfume. My name card looked out of place on the sleek glass table of the Harrington Group's conference room. I can still remember the way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, far too bright, making the sweat on my palms impossible to hide. I had spent weeks preparing, drafting business models, running numbers, designing mock-ups late into the night while surviving on instant noodles and lukewarm coffee. I believed, no, I knew, my idea could work. I stood in front of them, heart pounding, voice trembling but steady enough. What I'm proposing is a streamlined logistics service, one that could save you 20% in operational costs while guaranteeing faster delivery. The future is in supply efficiency. I didn't get to finish. Richard Harrington, the patriarch himself, leaned back in his leather chair, lips curling into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. His son, Daniel, smirked beside him like I was some kind of entertainment. "That's cute," Richard said, waving a dismissive hand. "But supply chain isn't for little startups run by idealists. We need real players. People with backing with weight." The word stung, idealists. As though my hard work, my vision, my late nights meant nothing. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "With respect, sir, I believe small companies can often outpace the giants. We're more agile, more innovative." Daniel chuckled under his breath. "Sure, sweetheart. Tell yourself that." The word sweetheart burned more than the rejection itself. My cheeks flamed, but I stood tall, gathering my notes, my pride clinging to me like armor. I walked out of that room with my head high, though inside I was crumbling. That night, sitting in my tiny apartment, I cried until my chest ached. Every word replayed in my mind. Cute, sweetheart, not a real player. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to tell me. She had pressed a small silver locket into my hand the day I left for college. "Sophia, people will underestimate you. Let them. Wear their doubt like fuel. And when the time comes, let them see what you've built." My fingers brushed that locket now, the cool metal grounding me. Through swollen eyes and a raw throat, I made a silent vow. One day, they'll regret underestimating me. And that was the night Sophia Bennett began her real journey. The days after the Harrington rejection felt endless, like walking with stones tied to my ankles. Every time I tried to sleep, their voices echoed in my head, "Sweetheart, not a real player." But instead of breaking me, their words carved steel into my spine. I took a second job at a small logistics warehouse just outside the city, working nights to pay rent and mornings to keep my tiny company alive. My office was nothing more than the corner of my apartment, with a wobbly desk and a laptop that overheated if I ran 2 programs at once. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, whispering to myself, Maybe they were right. Maybe I'm dreaming too big. But then my hand would brush against my grandmother's locket, and I'd push the thought away. The turning point came when I met Margaret Collins, a seasoned supply chain executive in her 50s who had retired early but still consulted for startups. She wasn't the type to hand out praise, but the first time she looked at my proposal, she nodded slowly. "You've got grit, Sophia," she said, her voice sharp but kind. "And vision. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You'll need to fight harder than most, but if you stick with it, you can win." Margaret became my mentor, my anchor. She taught me how to negotiate without flinching, how to draft contracts that protected me, and how to build systems that could scale. She never sugarcoated the truth. If I stumbled, she made me stand taller. The first big break came from a mid-sized furniture company desperate for reliable delivery. Their CEO took a chance on me, and I worked like a woman possessed, tracking shipments myself, driving across states to fix broken routes, even sleeping in warehouses when necessary. When they saw their costs drop and their timelines shrink, they signed a longer contract. That moment lit a fire inside me. From there, word spread. Small businesses started calling. Then larger ones. I wasn't rich yet, but every invoice I sent felt like another brick laid in the foundation of something unstoppable. Still, I kept my success quiet. On social media, I posted nothing but vague updates, working hard, learning lots, never revealing the truth. Not to family, not to old classmates, and certainly not to the Harringtons. I wanted the world to keep underestimating me, to think of me as the girl who failed. Because when the time came, the reveal would be undeniable. Years passed. My company grew from a one-woman operation into a firm with 50 employees, then 100. We built networks, technology, and infrastructure that outpaced competitors. And slowly, quietly, I gained something even the Harrington Group didn't have: control. Control of routes. Control of pricing. Control of the very supply lines their business depended on. And I never forgot that night in my apartment, clutching my grandmother's locket, swearing they would one day regret dismissing me. That day was closer than I imagined. 3 weeks after that email arrived, my receptionist buzzed me. "Ms. Bennett, the Harrington representatives are here to see you." For a moment, I just sat there, fingertips resting lightly on the edge of my desk. The name still carried weight in my chest, like a ghost rattling its chains. But instead of fear, I felt a steady calm rising inside me. "Send them in," I said, my voice smooth. The glass doors opened, and in walked Richard Harrington, older now, silver threading through his once black hair, but his presence still sharp. Beside him was Daniel, his arrogance dulled but not gone, the smirk replaced by something tighter. And trailing them, a small team of associates carrying leather briefcases. Their eyes swept over my office as they entered. I let them. The space was a reflection of everything they once told me I couldn't be. White marble floors gleamed beneath their polished shoes. On the wall hung abstract art I'd purchased at a New York gallery. Bold, unapologetic strokes of red and gold. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, from the diffuser I kept tucked in the corner. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the Chicago skyline, sunlight pouring in like proof of the heights I'd climbed. I rose slowly, smoothing the front of my silk blouse, my grandmother's silver locket resting just below my collarbone. "Mr. Harrington." "Daniel," I said, my smile polite, practiced. "Welcome." Richard extended a hand, his tone businesslike. "Ms. Bennett, thank you for meeting us. We've heard impressive things about your company." I shook his hand, steady and firm. "I'm sure you have." They sat across from me, their associates opening briefcases, pulling out documents, charts, proposals. I didn't rush them. I let the silence hang, my presence filling the room. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. "We'd like to discuss a long-term supply contract. Your firm has built quite a reputation for efficiency. Our operations have been strained. We believe a partnership would be mutually beneficial." His words were carefully chosen, but I could hear what he wasn't saying. "We need you." I leaned forward, resting my elbows lightly on the desk. "Interesting," I said. "Because the last time I proposed working together, your company made it very clear I wasn't suitable." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. Richard blinked, recognition dawning. You? He said slowly, his voice tinged with disbelief. Yes. I held his gaze. 10 years ago, I stood in your boardroom and pitched you an idea. You dismissed me, called me an idealist. Daniel, I turned to him, called me sweetheart. His face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, words failing him. The silence stretched, heavy. Their associates shifted in their seats, suddenly aware of the power balance tilting. I leaned back, letting the moment breathe. Then I dropped the truth. What you don't know is that I don't just run a logistics firm. I own the infrastructure that supports nearly half of your regional supply chain. The trucks that move your products, the warehouses that store them, the software that tracks them. My company built it, runs it, and controls it. Without me, your operations stall within weeks. Richard's lips parted, but no sound came out. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white. Daniel shook his head, muttering, That's not possible. It's very possible. I cut in gently. And it's real. Every route you rely on, every shipment you schedule, it passes through my system. Through me. The weight of the revelation pressed into the room like thunder. I could see it in their eyes. The disbelief giving way to shock. The shock curdling into something else. The dawning realization that the girl they once laughed at was now the woman holding their future. I folded my hands calmly on the desk. So, tell me, what exactly are you offering? Richard Harrington cleared his throat, searching for composure. We're prepared to offer generous compensation for your services. Equity, if that's what you're interested in. I tilted my head, studying him. How quickly the tone had changed, from dismissal to desperation. Money isn't the issue, Mr. Harrington. Control is. Daniel leaned forward, his voice strained. What do you want, then? Just name it. I let the silence linger, my grandmother's locket warm against my skin. Then I spoke, measured, deliberate. I'll work with you, but on my terms. Their associates looked up from their papers, pens frozen midair. Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly. Go on. First, I said, respect. I won't sit at a table where I'm patronized, dismissed, or talked over. My voice carries equal weight, or there is no deal. Daniel shifted, guilt flickering across his face. Second, I continued, investment in people. For every contract dollar that comes my way, 10% will be funneled into scholarships and training for women entering supply chain and logistics. The opportunities one never had, I'll create for others. And your company will co-sponsor them, publicly. Richard's brows furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. Third, I said, leaning forward, transparency. No more cutting corners, no shady contracts that exploit smaller businesses. If I see corruption, I walk, and I take your supply with me. The weight of my words hung heavy. For the first time, I saw Richard's mask slip, not into anger, but into something else, acknowledgement. He knew I had them cornered. Daniel rubbed a hand across his jaw. You're asking us to change the way we've operated for decades. I met his eyes without blinking. I'm not asking. I'm telling you, if you want access to my network, this is the price. Silence stretched. Then, to my surprise, Richard slowly leaned back in his chair. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he gave a single nod. You've grown into a formidable woman, Miss Bennett. I allowed myself a small smile. I was always formidable. You just didn't see it. For a moment, no one spoke. The skyline behind me gleamed in the afternoon sun, golden light spilling across the room like a quiet reminder of how far I'd come. Finally, Richard extended his hand again, this time not dismissive, not patronizing. Respectful. We accept your conditions. I reached across the desk, shaking it firmly. Then we have an understanding. As they gathered their papers, preparing to leave, I watched the shift in their posture. No longer the men towering over a young woman's trembling voice. Now, they were businessmen walking carefully in the shadow of someone they couldn't control. And I knew this was more than a contract. It was reclamation. The balance of power had changed permanently. They once refused my service. Now, they couldn't survive without my supply. The room felt lighter once they left, though their presence still lingered like fading echoes. I stood by the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, the city pulsing with movement, opportunity, life. For a long time, I just stood there, fingers brushing against the silver locket at my neck. The same one my grandmother had given me years ago. Her voice seemed to whisper through memory, wear their doubt like fuel. And when the time comes, let them see what you've built. She was gone now, but I hoped she could see me, see the empire I had built from the ashes of rejection. The Harringtons had walked out humbled. Maybe ashamed. Maybe determined to change. That part wasn't mine to control. What mattered was that I no longer needed their validation. I had already won long before they stepped into my office. Still, a part of me hoped they would follow through, that the scholarships and reforms wouldn't just be lines in a contract but real change for women who deserved better. If even one young woman could stand where I once stood, nervous, hopeful, underestimated, and not be dismissed, then everything I endured would be worth it. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one sitting in a tiny apartment, cheeks wet with tears after being laughed out of a boardroom. If I could tell her anything now, it would be this: hold on. The world won't always see your worth. But one day, they'll have no choice. A quiet strength filled me as I returned to my desk, sliding the signed contract into its folder. The jasmine scent still lingered in the air, mixing with the faint bitterness of my now-cold coffee. I sat back, exhaling slowly, my reflection faint in the glass window before me. No longer the trembling girl. No longer the one asking for permission. Now, I was the one who set the terms. And as I reached up, fingers closing gently around the locket, a small smile curved at my lips. They refused my service once, I whispered softly, the words rolling like a final vow. But now, I control their supply.